What has been your scariest encounter with another human being? Story 1. When I was 13, I just got dropped off from the school bus, so I had a lot of ways to walk home. As I got close to the corner of my street and some guy in a dark blue car rolled up and asked where I was headed, told him I was going home. The guy then excruciatingly slowed his car down to match my walk and asked if I wanted a ride home. I told him no thanks, I'm almost home. Then he continued to ask where I live and if I still wanted a ride home. Luckily, I had a phone at this age and pulled out my Nokia phone, I don't know why I remember this, and pretended to call my mom. She wouldn't have picked up the phone and I was almost home. The guy saw what I was doing and sped off like crazy. From the age of 13, I started carrying pepper spray. Story 2. When I was 15, I regularly was at home by myself since both of my parents worked full time and my brother had moved away to college. Well, one day during the summer, I was just relaxing at home when all of a sudden someone knocked on the front door. I get up and check the peephole and see two guys just standing in the driveway just off the porch. One of them is wearing a suit, the other is wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, but facing away from the house like he's playing lookout. I decide to ignore them because they'll go away, right? Wrong. They continue knocking, 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 but getting progressively louder and more aggressive. Finally, I decided to call the sheriff's department and ask for a non emergency check since they're trespassing. My dumb decides to yell through the door that I had called, and before I can even realize how dumb it is, the guy starts kicking the front door. I freak the heck out, run back toward the center of the house, and realize that there's a third guy trying to kick in the back door as well. At this point, I call 911 and start screaming about these three guys trying to break into my house. Notoriously, it took the sheriff's deputies longer to get there than anyone would imagine, and they saw the guys walking down the road later. Stopped them to question, but no arrest. Story 3. I was driving through a somewhat rough neighborhood at night, late after a movie, and while sitting at a light, we saw this guy in a beat-up car take a bump of cocaine next to us. We make eye contact. As the light turns green, he merges behind us and then proceeds to follow us around, flashing his lights and honking his horn for several blocks. We pull up to another red light. He pulls up next to us, yelling at us to roll down the window. Turns out, he just wanted to let us know we had a taillight out and then drove away. Story 4. My cousin, who was like 14, was babysitting us. She, 9-year-old, me, 4-year-old brother. Her dad called coming down from, I want to say, crack, heroin, I don't know, something real bad. He called and screamed at her to tell him where her piggy bank was. She told him to back off and hung up. He called back, she didn't pick up, and he left a voice message, which played as he was leaving it, saying, basically, he was going to come down there and murder all of us. With a knife, he was going to come down there and end us all. He was full of crap, but we were terrified. Can you imagine the pure fear a 9-year-old feels when a grown man who sounds crazy says he's going to murder her with a knife? So we prepared. We blocked out the windows, locked everything, and put heavy furniture in front of the doors. My brother was asleep in his room. My cousin told me, just leave him. But I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone in there, so I style belly crawled, heart beating out of my chest across the kitchen, through the living room to his room, scooped him up, and brought him back to my mom's room, which we then barricaded ourselves into. I got no sleep that night, and my mom and my aunt came back the next morning like, what the heck did you kids do? But I was honestly just happy to be alive and that my mom was home again. The worst part of the whole thing is when she got home, her dad had sold all of her belongings. I mean, everything, her bed, her dresser, TV, it was all gone. It was just an empty room. He's clean now, but I still hate his guts. Screw you, Uncle Donald. Story 5, late 80s. I was running errands in town with my mom and two sisters. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We are sitting in the car waiting, and then I see an older guy walking towards our car. I just get a really bad feeling and start yelling at my sisters to lock the doors, while I lock the two on my side. He comes over and spends the next couple of minutes trying to open all the doors on the car while we are cowering in our seats. Eventually, he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under in age at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car, he would take one of us. Story 6. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived in a townhome without a yard in a pretty nice area of town. We knew we were purchasing a house soon, so we went ahead and got our first puppy. I'm a morning person, whilst my husband is not, so I would usually get up around 5 a.m. and take the puppy out to the little patch of grass across the street from our townhome, still inside the entire complex, mind you. Did this for several months, no big deal. Well, one morning, while out waiting on the puppy, an old Ford van, all beat up with no windows, slowly drives by and goes back behind another building. A few minutes later, as I'm getting ready to cross the street and go back inside, the van comes back up the road to where I was getting ready to cross, stops in the middle of the road, and turns off its lights. I wave them in front of me, and at that point, both doors of the van started to open. All I remember was seeing someone start to get out before both the dog and I felt the undeniable urge to run across the street and inside as fast as possible. Once inside, the van sped off and disappeared. The creepiest part of this whole thing was when I went upstairs to wake my husband, only to find out he was in the middle of a dream where I'd been kidnapped. To this day, I refuse to run outside or go on walks alone, even on our quiet country roads. And big old vans still creep me out. Story 7. I was about 14 or 15. School had just ended, so the bus home was packed with other school kids too. We were a couple stops away from where everyone got on when this guy with a huge jacket, hood up, and mask on, we were in the middle of a heat wave, so super odd, got on the bus, stormed upstairs past me and my friends, and threw down this huge bag he was carrying. He screamed, "This is a bomb!" and ran off the bus. It took everyone a few seconds to process what just happened. But after those few seconds, I experienced the most crazy panic I've ever seen. Everyone bolted downstairs and tried to get out, but the doors were closed. I remember this huge black dude just punched the glass out of the door like it was nothing, and people were just dragging themselves through it. When I got to the door, I hit the emergency release to make it easier to jump off. Once we were out, we sprinted at least 500 meters down the road and crouched for the explosion. Except there was no explosion, it was just a hoax. Turns out that the guy that did it was someone from my school that had previously been expelled. Story 8. Me and my boyfriend came back at like 2 a.m. from a night out. We were both quite drunk and stumbled into the hallway to the elevator when we saw drops of something on the floor. It definitely was blood, fresh and wet. The elevator button and door were covered in bloody handprints as well. My boyfriend called the elevator, pushing me aside, not knowing what would be in it. Luckily, nothing except for a puddle of blood. The elevator came from the 5th floor, so we went investigating. The trail of blood ended at a door with huge hand smears of blood on the door. It took all our courage to ring, not the nicest place to live, robbery, but I am so glad we did. An elderly man opened the door. He looked straight out of a horror movie, covered in blood from head to toe. His gray sweater was red. His hair was wet. His shoes were filled with blood. We immediately sobered up. I called an ambulance, which arrived in 2 minutes. My BF went inside the flat, helping the man sit down. There was so much blood I have never seen in my life. We didn't know what happened to him until we met him properly for the first time yesterday. Recognized my boyfriend's glasses. He was drunk, wanted to ride his bike home, crashed somehow, and got a huge cut on his head. He takes heart medicine, which thins his blood. That's why he lost so much. If we wouldn't have rung the doorbell, he would have bled to death. He actually gifted us money and a super expensive bottle of champagne for something completely self-explanatory. Story 9. Was walking through campus after a night class, around 9 or 9:30 p.m. It's a big campus, UCF, and pretty empty at this point. The shuttle I took was at the other end of campus, so it was a pretty long walk. At one point, I'm walking through a swampy area with a raised boardwalk. There are two girls a ways ahead of me walking together. I see them reach the end of the boardwalk and go into the next building. As I reach the end of the boardwalk, this guy kind of hops up out of nowhere, or the surrounding woods, takes my hand and starts telling me how beautiful I am. What's my name? What year am I at uni? What am I doing tonight? Where do I live? I ask him why he wants to know, and he says, I'm taking a survey. I'm literally in such shock that it takes me a second to realize he's even touching me or has my hand. Everything he was asking me sounded really unauthentic and like it was scripted, like he was in a rush to get everything out. He also had this really weird, unsettling vibe that he was giving off that instantly freaked me out. But it was dark outside, and I was all alone at this point. Thankfully, a minute or two later, a guy walks out through the building, and I use that moment to break my hand away from the weirdo and tell him I have to go. I've never walked so fast to my shuttle, and looked over my shoulder the whole time. I couldn't stop shaking the whole ride home. Something about that guy was off, and I was sure if that man hadn't come out when he did, that something bad would have happened to me. Exactly what, I don't want to think about. Keep in mind, there had been a group of two girls walking ahead of me, and he hadn't approached them. He was looking for a girl by herself. Story 10. Went down to the local creek with my friend. We were probably 10 or so. The local creepy teenager shows up, drunk out of his mind. I immediately knew this was bad. He mumbles something under his breath, and I looked at my friend with the, "We need to get the heck out of here." He stepped closer towards us, and another guy, older and probably twice the size, ran up and grabbed him. He told us to go home and not come back. Later, the creepy guy was involved in a robbery that turned into murder, and I still feel so thankful to the other guy who was there. Story 11. I was up in my third floor bedroom, having just had a spliff, chilling to music with my headphones on when I started to hear weird noises. Naturally, I just thought it was because I was stoned, but it was weird enough for me to take my headphones off. I listened for a bit, and coming from downstairs was a creepy voice I didn't recognize, mixed in with John's, my housemate's voice, but he sounded like he was in pain. I was like, what the heck? So I started walking slowly down my stairs and then looked into his room and saw John on his floor holding his eyes in pain, with a big dude in a hoodie shouting at him and then grabbing things off the shelves. The next thing I knew, the autopilot had kicked in, and I ran towards the room, and the hooded dude turned, ran out the door when I smashed into him, making us both go tumbling down the staircase, trying to exchange punches on the way down. We scuffled a bit in the hallway until he eventually ran out the door. It transpired that John, who at that time was on crutches, was hobbling home and went to open our front door when the hooded dude came up behind him and pepper sprayed him in his face, blinding him. He then took him up to his bedroom to rob him and his stuff. Poor guy had to have iPads on for the next 2 days. Anyway, it was all pretty screwed up, but John was okay in the end, and honestly, I was so stoned it didn't really feel like it was happening at the time. It was like a bad trip. All moved out 2 weeks later was Brixton in London. Story 12. My first apartment was part of a complex that was U-shaped with a large grassy area in the middle. The neighborhood kids would run around and play in the grass a lot. One day I was sitting on my stoop, talking on the phone, when one of the kids fell over, grabbed his foot, and started crying. He was maybe 5 or 6. He had stepped on a bottle cap and sliced open his foot. I took him inside, had him sit on the edge of the tub, washed his cut, and put some Neosporin on it and a Band-Aid, and sent him on his way. A few hours later, there was a knock on my door. When I answered, a massive skinhead with a tattoo of a pentagram on his neck was standing there with his chest out. The boy was peeking around one of his giant thighs, pointing at me. He stuck his finger in my chest and yelled, "Did you take my boy in your house? That's my son. Did you give him a bath? Look at his foot!" I shrieked. "He cut his foot. I washed the cut." He inspected the kid's foot, then asked me, what exactly happened? I stumbled through the story. Then he just said, "All right then." He shook my hand with a vice grip, and I never saw him or his son again. Story 13. Last year, I moved from a dense urban area to a really pretty underpopulated rural one. I got super into trail running. There's a big circular route that I like a lot in the local nature preserve. And over the summer, I was on an early morning run there when I passed a dude sitting on a rock slightly off the trail. He looked exceedingly normal. Street clothes, hat, boots, etc., and I figured him for a hiker. All good. So I make my way down the path, around uphill, and to this nice overlook, where I usually stop to drink from the fountain. It's when I'm bent over at the fountain that I hear a twig snap, and I straighten up to see that guy, crouched over and stepping through the woods off the clearing, like he's trying to creep up on me. I bolted. The sprint back was the most terrifying experience of my life, obviously. I don't know if I lost him or if he gave chase at all. The police never found anyone matching his description, and I don't run anywhere near there anymore. Story 14. I spent a few months when I was 16 hanging out with some organized crime guys in my hometown. Dudes had Uzis in their trunks, and people didn't screw with them. One night I went with a younger one, mid-20s, on an errand. I wasn't told what for, but he started driving to a bad part of town and told me I was going to help him take care of something. I got out at a stoplight and started walking. Something wasn't right. I never spoke to those dudes again. I was pretty sure at the time I was going to get finished off or help end someone. In retrospect, I was probably just on a beer run or maybe sent to go pick up some money from a gambler or something. But at the time, I was convinced I was going to be a part of, or a victim, to a major crime. Story 15. Was riding my bike to school, taking the bike trail, when I noticed a guy leaning against a light post. I thought nothing of it since I've taken this trail pretty much every day throughout high school. Anyway, I'm riding and things go dark. Turns out, as I passed by, the guy pistol whipped me, woke up to him trying to take my feet out of the straps of my bike. He notices I'm awake and immediately points his gun at me, asking me to hand my bike over. I resisted at first, telling him that my mom had just bought it for me, after begging so long for it. He took it anyway. Still bugs me to this day. Story 16. I was investigating a fire for an insurance company in a fourplex in North STL. North STL is a bad, bad area. It was clearly an arson. I had 5 separate, unconnected fires. I'd been there for a while, taking photos and doing my thing. I was drawing my diagram in the building when I heard 2 guys walking by the building on the other side of the wall. I'm straining to hear what they're saying since it could be pertinent to my investigation. The 2 guys get to the rear of the building where the fire department had ripped out the wall to be able to extinguish hotspots they'd found. I can clearly see them both standing there talking. They start to kick through the debris on the ground, and one starts saying how some dumb crap had snitched on his buddy for setting this fire. He starts telling the other guy about how he's going to deal with her and pulls a goddamn pistol out of his waistband. At this point, I'm frozen in fear about pooping my pants, hoping that they don't look 90 degrees and see me standing there like a jerk. So I crouch down as low as I can without making noise and wait. They continue to talk about how it's crap she told the cops on him and blah, blah, blah. Finally, a car drives by, and I use the sound of it to get out of the house, out the front door, which unfortunately wasn't super quiet, since most of the floor had collapsed and I was wearing fire boots. I get to my truck across the street. I'm sitting in the driver's seat trying to unclench my butthole when the guy with the gun walks around the side of the house to the front porch, sits down, and aims it at me. I turned the truck on and got the heck out of there. I ended up going back about an hour later to see if they were gone because I had to finish my scene. Still, the top 5 scariest moments of my career so far. Story 17 was trying to take my GF to the hospital since we thought she had appendicitis or something. It's like 12:30 a.m. on a Sunday in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which, if you don't know, is absolute crap. We were 2 streets away from where we were living when we came across this street racing type car, neon lights on the rims and crap, pulled out halfway into the road. I stop and wait a while for it to move, and it doesn't. So I pull around it and keep going. The car accelerates and cuts me off around the bend. It slows down and won't let me pass. A second car pulls up on the right. A third car pulls up on the left. At this point, we're boxed in. A young black guy wearing a white tank top and khaki shorts gets out of the car holding a pistol. Someone else in the car hands him a blue bandana. Then he starts walking towards us. At this point, I'm starting to realize that this is too many people for a robbery, and there was a reason for him being handed the bandana, and it's probably a gang initiation. So I threw the car in reverse and bumped into a fourth car I hadn't been looking at because I was looking at the guy with the gun. I threw it forward and went to squeeze past the car on the left and the front car when the guy started shooting. He fired 3 shots, which thankfully didn't hit either of us. It's important to mention that at this point, we're on sort of a back road a bit away from a 4-way intersection with a stoplight. Across the street, there's a shopping center with a 24-hour grocery store across the street. I speed through the red light with the intention of going to the store and asking for help. Before I can make it across, we get T-boned on the passenger side by a completely unrelated vehicle that was going 55 miles per hour. Car spun out, ended up on the side of the road, and was totaled. The guys in the cars screwed off once other people were involved. I ended up getting a traumatic brain injury and whiplash from the car accident and was paranoid for a very long time afterwards. My GF ended up mostly okay. Some bruised ribs and whiplash as well. Story 18. I'd just spent a fantastic Saturday evening at a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. Beer begat beer, and then somehow single malt whiskey pushed its way into the party. I left his house at about 12:30 a.m. and caught a tram home. The tram was crowded enough that I needed to stand near the door. Sometime around halfway home, the tram stopped at a station, and I looked up from the book I was reading to see some enraged guy charging across the tracks, yelling as he came towards me. Because my blood was somewhere around 20% scotch, it took me a while to realize that he was running across the tracks towards me specifically. I heard him yell. I saw his saliva splatter on the tram door. He punched the tram door twice, really hard. Thankfully, the tram doors do not open on the other side while it is stopped at the station. As the tram began to depart, he still held on for a few seconds while some of the other folks on the tram, safe in the knowledge he couldn't get in, started to tease him.